Lyme disease. I'm willing to bet that when I say those two words, it elicits a number of different reactions. Some of you might think, Lyme disease, never had it, don't know anybody who's had it, not a big deal to me. And to you, I say, be thankful, but hang in there with me because I think what I have to say here today might have some relevance for you too. Some of you might think, Lyme disease, I had that a little while ago, or I think my Aunt Susie was diagnosed with it, but we took some antibiotics and it cleared right up and everything's okay now. And to you, I also say be thankful because you are kept from having what is likely the third reaction. Because many of you, when I say those two words, Lyme disease, you are shuddered to your core. And you have that reaction because you or someone you love or someone you know had been diagnosed with Lyme disease and has suffered in an almost unimaginable way. Lyme has the ability to turn your life inside out and upside down, and it also happens to be one of the most contentious and complex medical controversies in history. Now, as we all probably know, you contract Lyme disease by getting bitten by a tick that carries the Lyme bacteria. And many of you might be thinking, I don't live in the northeastern United States, I don't need to worry about this. But I can tell you that you do. Because while the greatest concentration of Lyme diagnoses are certainly in the northeastern US, the Lyme Disease Association has identified Lyme as one of the fastest growing infectious diseases in the country. There are documented cases in all 50 states and in over 80 different countries throughout the world. So clearly, this is no longer just a regional problem. So once that bacteria gets into your bloodstream, it starts to invade your cells. And then it disrupts the functioning of those cells. And in Lyme's classic presentation, what that results in is usually sore and swollen joints, probably a bullseye rash, maybe some paralysis of the facial muscles, and then people will oftentimes experience some pretty intense fatigue. Now, none of this is good, of course, but the bigger problem is that there's some debate over the interpretation of what kinds of problems Lyme can actually cause. In the sort of classic interpretation requires a presentation of a very specific set of symptoms, positive blood test. It's rather strict diagnostic criteria. That all sounds pretty reasonable, except there are a number of physicians who have real problems with the way that those particular guidelines were developed, and they see Lyme in a broader context. They are very suspicious of the accuracy of the diagnostic testing, and they recognize that the Lyme bacteria can invade any cell in the body and disrupt multiple bodily symptoms, and therefore present in a much wider array of symptoms. These physicians also believe that Lyme can become a persistent and chronic infection leading to chronic illness. And the physicians who have that narrower, stricter view don't necessarily believe that, and that leads to a lot of conflict between these two groups. So why does any of that matter to us? Why is that important? Well, as I mentioned, Lyme is possibly one of the most contentious and complex medical controversies in all of history, pulling in politics, the legal system, insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and government agencies. At times, this debate has become nothing short of hostile. Under the best of circumstances, you have two camps of medical professionals arguing intensely over what the most basic aspects of this disease are. At its worst, you have obstructive actions that interfere with good scientific research and quality patient care. The patients. What happens to them in all of this? Well, let me ask you, if you have the experts in this disease who cannot come to any agreement on the most basic aspects of how to diagnose and treat it, what is a patient supposed to do? I have a PhD and I can't figure all of this out. What is somebody who is sick and compromised, who's probably not a healthcare professional, who's probably not a healthcare researcher, supposed to do? Who are they supposed to believe? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to those questions. I wish that were the topic of my talk today. Afterwards, I could go collect my Nobel Prize in medicine and go home and live happily ever after. But I don't have a medical degree. I'm not a medical doctor. So these questions and these answers are somewhat beyond my expertise. But as a psychologist, what I can do is I can help these people who feel sick, scared, angry, frustrated, and trapped to lead the best lives that they possibly can while they are trying to figure all of this out and get well. Lyme disease or not, other chronic illness or not, can any of you think of a time in your life when you felt sick or confused or trapped or scared or angry? What do you do when you're suffering like that? As a psychologist, it's my job to help people lead the most meaningful and fulfilling lives that they can. Life does not always cooperate with this goal. Lyme disease certainly does not cooperate with this goal. We all know life happens. And if we've been on this planet for more than 5 minutes, we've probably experienced some kind of distress, some kind of pain, some kind of difficulty that has interfered with our ability to live that meaningful life. Lyme disease certainly interferes with our ability to live that meaningful life, just like a lousy job can, or a toxic relationship, or any other difficulties that we might face. So when we're in this state and we're feeling this way, the question is, what do we do? Well, typically what we want more than anything is simply to not feel that way. So we pour all of our energy into trying not to be angry, not to be anxious, not to be depressed, not to be sick. And certainly with a disease like Lyme disease, that is all that you want. All you want is to feel like yourself again. All you want is to feel well and to be healthy. The problem with this approach is that it tends to bring our lives to a grinding halt. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me here. Lyme disease itself can absolutely bring your life to a grinding halt. But how much you choose to make your disease or your illness the focus of your life can have a profound effect on the quality of your life. Do you make everything in your life about trying not to be sick? Or do you make everything in your life about trying to lead the best life that you possibly can while you happen to be sick? I'm obviously advocating for the latter approach, and this, of course, is easier said than done, but there are ways to get there. Over the past couple of decades, a group of psychologists have been developing a form or approach to psychotherapy. It's really more of an approach to living, called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And what ACT is, it's grounded in solid behavioral theory it's been around for a very long time, and it also pulls in Eastern philosophies, and its primary goal is to help people to do things in their lives that are meaningful and that work for them right here, right now, in this moment. And the way that ACT does that is it promotes this concept or this state of being known as psychological flexibility. And that's kind of fancy terminology for really just being in a state where you are open to experiencing whatever feelings or sensations or thoughts that you might be having at that point in time, free of judgment and not trying to control what it is you're feeling, and engaging in behaviors that are going to move you towards things that are meaningful to you. One of the main premises behind ACT is that we have a tendency to get ourselves into more trouble by trying not to feel things rather than just allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling and move through that. The classic example of this is someone who has an alcohol problem, who drinks to not feel depressed or drinks to not feel anxious, and in the process creates a whole other set of problems for themselves. When we engage in this, what we would call control agenda, trying to control the uncontrollable, it ends up causing all kinds of problems and we feel trapped. An ACT is designed to free us from that trap. Now, as a therapist who practices ACT, what I try to do with my clients to help them be more psychologically flexible is I take them through a series of processes. I can't cover all of those today, but I'm going to hit the two big ones that I think are most relevant for people who are dealing with Lyme disease or other chronic illness. So the first, this is the proverbial elephant in the room, so to speak, acceptance. Acceptance gets a bad rap. Right? Most people, when they hear that word, particularly people who are chronically ill or have Lyme disease or who are suffering, they hear the word acceptance, and what do they think? They think they're being told, you're sick, you're always going to be sick, there's nothing you can do about it, just suck it up. Right? That attitude makes acceptance kind of a tough sell. Right? But the reality is that what acceptance actually is could not be further from that perspective. Acceptance is not about giving up. Acceptance is not about no longer trying to be well. Acceptance is not about no longer seeking treatment. What it is about is being open to feeling whatever it is you might be feeling in the current moment, allowing yourself to feel that and move through it without trying to control, escape, avoid, or extinguish that feeling. Because I have news for you, we're not very good at doing that. We're not wired that way. We can't not feel things in the same way that we can't feel things that we don't feel. You all know what I'm talking about here. Remember the last time you were really, really angry? What is the last thing you want someone to say to you when you're in that state? Calm down. Right? What happens when somebody tells you to calm down? They're asking you to control your emotions. All you get is angrier. Right? Remember that crush you had in high school? How successful were you on trying not to have that crush? Exactly. Now, this may sound bleak, right? I just have to feel all these feelings, but what it actually is liberating. Because when you let go of that struggle and you stop putting all of your energy into not feeling this, not feeling that, what you actually do is you free up resources to be able to move your life in a meaningful direction. Lyme disease in particular will rob you of those resources. We don't want to help it along anymore, right? So you want to take that energy and you want to put it into moving towards things that are deeply meaningful and consistent with your values, which brings me to process number 2, your values. Your values are things that are deeply meaningful and important to you. Multiple domains in your life, health, leisure, family. You get to choose these. That's the good news. We don't choose our emotions, but our values, that's all you. Right? Values are not goals. They're not achievable. They're more like consistent guideposts that we use in our decision making. We always want to be moving towards our values. And what happens is, if you're moving towards your values, it eases the acceptance process. It opens you up because you're moving towards something and it might be painful, because a lot of times moving towards the things that are meaningful to us, it hurts. It hurts because it matters. But that pain has a purpose, and pain with a purpose is not suffering. I worked with a woman once who lost her life, lost her career, her family, and her health to Lyme disease. She was living a life in fear and was essentially bedridden, only getting up to take care of her dog. So in my work with her, we identified her love of animals as a value, and I encouraged her to pursue a volunteer position at a local animal shelter. She was terrified. But because that fear was connected to something that was meaningful to her, that she really wanted, it allowed her to open up and accept that fear and move towards something that was purposeful and meaningful to her. And guess what happened? She got the volunteer position. She helped suffering animals. She made friends. She found a community. Her life became more meaningful, which would not have happened if all she did was try to avoid those feelings and that fear. So, if you have Lyme disease or some other chronic illness, or even if you're just suffering or struggling with anything in your life, ask yourself the question, where are you putting your energy? Are you pouring it into trying not to feel things? Or are you putting it into trying to live the most meaningful life that you can, even if that means that it's difficult or painful? When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you open yourself up to a whole new worlds of things that you can do. Now, her Lyme disease did not go away. She was still sick, but her life was more meaningful. This is what we want to try to do. Now, I get it. Lyme disease or other illnesses or other problems in our lives can be awesomely debilitating. If you have Lyme, you might not be able to walk or do anything that you used to be able to do before you got sick. But any movement in a valued direction is more likely to bring meaning to your life, no matter how small. Holding a hand, sharing a moment with a loved one is better than trying to control the uncontrollable. I want to thank TEDx Bryant-U, the university, the organizational committee, all of you for listening to what I have to say here today. I believe that ACT can help people to live more meaningful lives, even people who are suffering from debilitating illnesses. There are many resources out there. I would encourage you to seek them out, engage with them, and live well, even if you don't feel well. Thank you.